the legitimate business of all judges to be concerned about the rule of law in other countries. So, welcome back to Law Hero, everybody. Law Hero? Law Hero. You're here at Law Hero. Welcome back to YouTube. My name is Jen and I make videos about the law. And today we are talking about the rule of law, something like I love to bits, one of my favorite concepts. It's a lot to do with philosophy, but we're talking about it within the context of Mr. Justice, so ex-Chief Justice Frank Clark, and now Peter Kelly, who is also an ex-High Court judge. They are under a lot of pressure in the media because of their association with the DIFC, which is the Dubai International Financial Centre, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. In a nutshell, what is the rule of law? And I quote from Wikipedia: the rule of law is a political philosophy, I would say legal philosophy, that all citizens and institutions within a country, state or community are accountable to the same laws, including lawmakers and leaders. The rule of law is defined in the Encyclopedia Britannica as the mechanism, process, institution, practice or norm that supports the equality of all citizens before the law, secures a non-arbitrary form of government, and more generally prevents the arbitrary use of power. The term rule of law is closely related to constitutionalism as well as Rechtsstaat, and refers to a political situation, not to any specific legal rule. And Aristotle, which he basically said that it is more proper that law should govern than any one of the citizens, meaning, you know, nobody is bigger than the law. And with that in mind, it means that the rule of law means that everyone is accountable under the law, and that includes TDs, senators, ministers, the Gardaí, any type of public officials, including judges. Now, during COVID, we had the Wolf scandal, which actually came up on one of the FE1 papers. And the question that the examiner asked in the FE1 paper was, should there be some kind of judicial sanctions committee, as in if a judge behaves inappropriately, should there be some kind of a tribunal to deal with it? And it's rather interesting because it is a constitutional law principle that judges should be independent, and this comes back to the rule of law. Now, when you think about it, when you take a step back, obviously for there to be a functioning democratic state, there needs to be separation of powers, but the powers in themselves need to be independent, they need to be reliable, as in you can't have a corrupt judiciary, you know, based on nepotism and bribes. Same with the government. Everybody hates that kind of thing. And the reason we hate it is because of this perceived sense of injustice or unfairness. And that's where the rule of law comes from. It's like, you know, you may not like it, but at least everybody is treated the same before the law. That's the whole point of the rule of law. It actually encourages equality. Now, for us in Ireland, we follow our EU counterparts, being a member of the EU. And as you all know, the European Convention for the Protection of Human Rights actually enshrines the rule of law. And what it basically says is the governments of European countries which are like-minded, which I think is brilliant, and have a common heritage of political traditions, ideals, freedom and the rule of law. In France and Germany, the concept of rule of law, in France it's called the État de droit, and in Germany, Rechtsstaat, are analogous to the principles of constitutional supremacy and protection of fundamental rights from public authorities. And that is basically public law, particularly the legislature. As we know, the judiciary are tasked with upholding the law and also checking the behaviour of the legislature and the executive. France, as we know, was an early pioneer of the rule of law, given the French Revolution. And in Germany, the rule of law is far more rigid than in any other European country. I would say this is definitely true, given what I have experienced in Germany, but also when you think about it, for example, data protection in Germany is at an all-time high because of the protection of privacy in Germany is much, much higher than in any other country. Austria followed suit, and that's why, for example, you had Max Schrems. These people don't come out of a vacuum. They come from a really hard instilled idea of what it means to live in a democratic state. I would say it's far more studied in those countries. Constitutional law principles are far more studied in those countries because of their history, because of Napoleon, because of World War II. In Ireland, because we were colonised, I don't think we have the same regard for the rule of law, simply because we don't have that warfare history. We weren't a warlike nation. We didn't cause harm to other countries. We were the victim of an oppressor. So our perception of constitutional law principles are different. And indeed, because of the Irish Free State and because of our constitution came after a lot of what went on in Europe, we basically followed suit. Which was handy for us because it means we didn't have to reinvent the wheel. But it also, I think, meant that while we have constitutional law scholars in Ireland, and while we do revere the rule of law, I don't think we do to the same level as our European counterparts, because we've never had a Holocaust in Ireland. We've never colonised anyone as an Irish nation. We're neutral, for flip's sake. Like, it makes sense that we're not all up in this rule of law business, but by God, when it doesn't go right in this country, we are the first to complain. And I like that because it means that we have an inherent sense of justice in this country. And that is a nice little segue into our friends, Mr. Justice Clarke and Mr. Peter Kelly. Now, I am not talking about these people's personal lives or about them, about them as people. I'm talking about their professional decisions, of course. So let's just take a step back in history. And in June 2021, Chief Justice Frank Clarke, while he was still in that office, made a few comments around the rule of law, which I think are rather interesting in light of this August 2022 scandal that has come out. So last year, Chief Justice Clarke, while he was still in that office, said that it is entirely appropriate for judges to express solidarity with judicial colleagues in other countries who are in disagreement with governmental policy directions. It's the legitimate business of all judges to be concerned about the rule of law in other countries. He actually said that out loud. And then lo and behold, a year later, here comes Moneybags. And they are Moneybags, the Dubai International Financial Centre courts. Now, what the hell is the DIFC, you may ask? So the DIFC is the leading financial hub for the Middle East, Africa and South Asia, which comprises 72 countries with an approximate population of 3 billion and a nominal GDP of 7.7 trillion. Yeah, it's like a hub, it's like a finance hub, and they have certain laws around how they run this place. It's almost like a district, and Dubai laws, and then they have DIFSC regulations. Yeah, I mean, there's like limited liability partnerships, securities, IP, insolvency, all kind of commercially based laws. So then the controversy comes out, and I'll read it from The Independent. It says, pressure is mounting on former President of the High Court, Peter Kelly, to consider removing his position of the DIFSC. Controversy erupted after the appointment of Ireland's two best-known judges to senior court roles in the UAE, but former Chief Justice Frank Clarke resigned from the DIFSC over the weekend. It came after questions were raised about whether his new position is compatible with his existing role as President of the Law Reform Commission. The decision of the judges to take up senior roles in a commercial court court based on the common law in the UAE, a country with a checkered record on human rights, has been criticised by several well-known legal figures in Ireland. Alex White, senior counsel, said the decision demonstrated a major absence of justice. Meanwhile, a retired barrister and human rights campaigner, Bill Shipsey, SC, wrote a critical article on the appointment saying Mr. Justice Clark had made a brave and correct decision to resign. Now, let's think about why this is such a big deal. It's such a big deal because, in the words of Frank Clark himself, judges have a duty to be collegiate to fellow judges when they're in an untenable human rights situation. And what they've done is they've completely contradicted themselves. And why this is controversial is because if you're a member of the public and see these senior judges who are contradicting themselves, as in monkey see, monkey do, monkey don't do what monkey say, then that sheds a light on the rest of the judiciary that they are also not acting properly in their appointment as judges. And then what happens is you lose legitimacy of the judiciary, which is the very start of a democratic state breaking down. Just like if your legislator starts acting like your TDs, or your senators start taking bribes, you know, backhanders like Fianna Fáil used to do, that delegitimizes the government and there may be a vote of no confidence. This is all to do with keeping things steady. It is really, really easy to fall into chaos and become a Wild West. I remember years ago, I went on a radio program just as a non-lawyer because I wasn't qualified then, but I defended a paedophile who had been released from prison after 20 years and was nearly beaten to death in Cork City because nobody else was saying anything. So I thought I might take it upon myself to, you know, give a counter argument. And I actually got death threats on Facebook. And at the time, I kind of, you know, didn't think much of it. But I remember I was studying constitutional law at the time, and I said that we have to trust the prison systems. We have to trust the judges. We may not like that this person is in our community. It may, you know, we may be projecting our own fears on this person, and that ultimately ended in violence for this person. But when we start to take the law into our own hands, our country disintegrates into chaos, and that goes against all of us. Not just the paedophile, it goes against all of us. And that was the point I was trying to make on the radio. And of course, people hated me for it. But 10 years later, I stand by that fact. The price you have to pay in a democratic society is you accept the consequences of living in a democratic society. And I would rather live in a country like the Republic of Ireland, where there is the rule of law and a legitimate expectation in how my case will be handled, regardless of what I did, and that there's some protection around my freedom and that there's some protection around my dignity as a human, than live in countries like those I have just mentioned in this video. And that is why I think it's shameful that these two judges thought it was right to join that court. It's just my opinion. Please let me know in the comments below what you thought. This is how these controversies arise. I just think it's rich that they spoke in such a, you know, passionate manner the year before about assisting other judges and the circumstances they have to operate in, and then they go and do this. Just saying. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.